I'm not good enough for anyone. The words were barely louder than a breath. Yet somehow they cut through the noise of the crowded community center and landed directly in my chest. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I had only come to pick up my 6-year-old daughter after her art class. The room buzzed with conversation. Parents laughed near the coffee table. Children ran across the floor waving colorful drawings. But those 6 words stopped everything. I glanced toward the corner of the room. A woman stood alone beside a bulletin board covered with flyers and announcements. She looked to be in her late 40s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a faded sweater and carried herself as though she hoped no one would notice she was there. Beside her stood an older woman, perhaps a friend. "I'm serious," the woman whispered, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm not good enough for anyone." The friend immediately disagreed, but the sadness in the woman's face told me this wasn't the first time she'd said it, and it definitely wasn't the first time she'd believed it. I looked away. It wasn't my business. A few minutes later, my daughter, Emma, came running toward me, holding a painting covered in bright blue handprints. "Daddy, look, it's beautiful," I said. She grinned. Then she pointed across the room. "That's Miss Sarah." I followed her finger. "The woman from earlier." "Who's Miss Sarah?" I asked. "She helps everyone." Emma said it so casually, as if everyone already knew. Before I could ask more, Sarah walked over carrying a stack of art supplies. She smiled lightly. Emma forgot her paintbrush again. Emma giggled. "I always forget." Sarah handed it to her. "No worries." Her voice was gentle, warm, the kind of voice that instantly made people feel safe. "Thank you," I said. She nodded, then quickly stepped away before the conversation could continue, almost as though she was afraid of taking up too much space. Over the next several weeks, I kept seeing her. Not because I was looking, because she seemed to be everywhere, helping elderly neighbors carry groceries, organizing donation drives, serving meals at the shelter, watching children whose parents were running late. Whenever someone needed help, Sarah appeared, and yet, she always remained in the background. No spotlight, no recognition, no attention. One afternoon, I asked Emma's art teacher about her. The teacher laughed softly. "Sarah practically keeps this place running. Does she work here?" "Not officially." "Then why does she do so much?" The teacher paused. "Because that's who she is." I looked through the window. Sarah was outside helping a little boy tie his shoe. The child smiled. She smiled back. For a moment, she looked genuinely happy. Then the expression disappeared as if joy was something she allowed for everyone except herself. A month later, I learned why. The community center hosted a fundraising dinner. I arrived with Emma and found myself seated beside Sarah. At first, conversation was awkward. She spoke very little, mostly asking questions about Emma. Eventually, she relaxed enough to answer a few questions herself, and slowly pieces of her story emerged. She had been married once for nearly 20 years. Then her husband left, not for another woman, not because of some dramatic betrayal. He simply decided he didn't want the marriage anymore. After the divorce, things got worse. Her confidence vanished. Friends drifted away. Family members offered sympathy mixed with criticism. Some suggested she should have tried harder. Others implied she wasn't interesting enough to keep a husband. Over time, those comments became beliefs, and those beliefs became her identity. "I know it sounds silly," she said quietly. "It doesn't." She stared at her untouched coffee. "When someone leaves, you start wondering what was wrong with you. There doesn't have to be anything wrong with you." She smiled sadly. "That's easy for other people to say." I didn't know how to answer because I understood more than she realized. After my wife died 8 years earlier, I had spent years believing I had failed somehow. Failed as a husband, failed as a protector, failed as a father. Grief has a strange way of turning pain into guilt, even when guilt doesn't belong there. That night, after the fundraiser ended, Sarah helped clean tables long after everyone else had gone home. As usual, giving, serving, helping, never asking for anything in return. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Emma got sick. Nothing life-threatening, but severe enough to keep her home from school for nearly 2 weeks. As a single father working full-time, I was struggling. Balancing meetings, doctor's appointments, and caring for Emma felt impossible. Then one evening, there was a knock at my door. I opened it. Sarah stood there holding a casserole dish. "I heard Emma wasn't feeling well." I blinked. "How did you know?" "The community center talks for the first time." I saw genuine humor in her eyes. "I made dinner. You didn't have to do that." "I know." She smiled, but I wanted to. Over the following days, she checked in frequently, dropping off soup, bringing books, sending encouraging messages for Emma. Small acts, simple acts, but they changed everything because kindness matters most when people need it most. When Emma finally recovered, she hugged Sarah tightly. "You're my favorite grown-up." Sarah laughed. "I thought your dad was your favorite. He's number 2. I pretended to be offended. Sarah laughed harder. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A woman who had forgotten her own worth. A woman who gave love freely while believing she deserved none herself. Months passed. Our friendship deepened. Then one evening, everything changed. The community center held a volunteer appreciation event. Dozens of people gathered. Families, teachers, neighbors, children. Halfway through the evening, the director stepped onto the stage. "We'd like to recognize someone special." Applause filled the room. The director continued. "This person has quietly served our community for years." Sarah immediately looked uncomfortable. I knew she was realizing who they meant. The director smiled. "Sarah, would you please come up here?" The audience erupted. People stood, cheered, clapped. Some even wiped away tears. Sarah froze, completely stunned. Then she slowly walked toward the stage. The director began reading letters, dozens of them. Letters from people Sarah had helped over the years. A single mother who received groceries when she couldn't feed her children. A teenager who almost dropped out of school before Sarah encouraged him to keep going. An elderly man whose loneliness disappeared because Sarah visited him every week. Story after story, person after person, life after life. Touched by one woman who believed she wasn't enough. By the time the final letter was read, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Sarah stood motionless. Tears streamed down her face. The director handed her the microphone. She looked overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." The crowd waited. For several seconds, she simply cried. Then she spoke. "I spent years believing I had nothing valuable left to give." Silence filled the room. "My marriage ended." Her voice trembled, and I convinced myself that meant I wasn't worth loving. People listened carefully. I thought helping others was the only thing I had left. She paused, and honestly, I never imagined anyone noticed. At that moment, Emma jumped from her chair. Before I could stop her, she ran to the stage. The audience laughed softly. Emma grabbed the microphone. "That's not true." Sarah looked down. "What isn't true?" Emma wrapped her arms around her. "Everybody notices." The room melted. Even the toughest people were crying now, but Emma wasn't finished. She pointed toward the audience. "Look." Sarah lifted her eyes. Hundreds of people stared back, smiling, crying, nodding, grateful, loved. Lives changed because of her. And for the first time, she truly saw it. The impact she had made, the difference she had created, the value she carried. Later that evening, after the event ended, I found Sarah standing outside beneath the stars. The parking lot was quiet. The night air felt cool. She looked different somehow, lighter, as though she had set down a burden she'd carried for years. "I still can't believe all of that happened," she said. "It happened because it was true." She smiled, then looked down. "You know something strange?" "What?" "For years, I thought my worth depended on whether someone chose me." I nodded, and now she took a deep breath. "Now I think maybe my worth was never determined by who left," I smiled. "That's because it wasn't." Tears filled her eyes again. Happy tears this time. Then she laughed softly. "You know, for someone who claims not to be wise, you say some pretty wise things. Occupational hazard of raising a 6-year-old. She laughed. The sound felt brighter than I'd ever heard. Then I said something I had been wanting to say for a long time. "Sarah, yes, you're wrong about one thing." She tilted her head. "What thing?" I met her eyes. "The part where you said you're not good enough for anyone." She stared at me, silent, waiting. I smiled. "You're more than enough." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then tears slipped down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness, not tears of regret. Tears of finally believing something beautiful about herself. And as we stood beneath the stars, surrounded by a community, she had quietly transformed. Through years of kindness and selflessness, I realized something powerful. The people who change the world rarely know they're changing it. The people who give the most often underestimate their value. And sometimes the heart that needs saving is the very heart that has spent years saving everyone else. Sarah thought she wasn't good enough for anyone, but she was wrong. She had always been enough. Enough to inspire, enough to heal, enough to matter, enough to be loved. And finally, after years of doubting herself, she was beginning to believe it too.